Well, hello, this is Bill Rogers Sunday School class. We are in the Gospel of John. We're starting with chapter 11 today as we've gone through the book of John. I have a visual I want to share with you, and we will, let's see. Now I can't find the button. Share screen, here we go. And I've got a handout. If I were teaching this in a classroom, I would have this poster on the wall. John has organized his gospel. There's a very interesting summary, a theological summary of the significance of Jesus in that first half of the first chapter. And then he gets to John the Baptist and the ministry there. But he has, in the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God, the same was in the beginning with God. Without him, nothing was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. So these things, the Word, life, light, those are then recurring titles that John applies to Jesus throughout the book. Another structural thing that he is doing is what he calls signs. The word like signposts are significant events. And the first one he mentions is changing the water to wine. The second one is where he healed an official's son in chapter 4. He healed the invalid at Bethesda at the pool in chapter 5. And then he fed 5,000. Now we have glossed over because we can't do verse by verse. It just takes too long. We're doing portion by portion and skipping in between. But he fed 5,000. He walked on the water. More recently, chapter 9, a couple of weeks ago, we had him healing the man born blind. And then today we're going to have the seventh sign, the last of the signs, where he raises Lazarus from the dead. And so we're going to pick up in the narrative. You may be very familiar with this, even from childhood, because this is a nice story and you can color pictures. I remember we would just color, and the teacher would do the flannel graph. Do you remember flannel graph? What a cool technology that was. And so we have little cutout figures that the teacher could move around, and it helped us to visualize what the words were telling us as children. And then we would have a single line drawing picture that we would color. And I can even remember we got stars to stick in our Sunday school book if we had read our lesson before we got there, and the glue on the stars tasted awful. Do y'all remember how that was? Anyway, this is all ancient technology nowadays. Everybody has stuff on their cell phone, so on and so forth. We're going to pick up in verse 32 for the passage today, but we'll summarize what happened before. They send word to Jesus that this man named Lazarus is ill. He has two sisters which occur in other places, Mary and Martha. Mary is the one who is the doer. She is busy about putting things together. And Martha is the one who wants to sit at Jesus' feet. And Martha, her sister, comes and scolds her. Why aren't you helping me? We've got a bunch of people to feed, that kind of thing. And Jesus actually gives a mild rebuke, but apparently he was very closely associated with this family. And it mentions in here how much he loved Lazarus in today's passage. Now, the family was somehow very closely associated with the Pharisees. I don't know. Lazarus is never called a Pharisee, but they were well known in the Jewish community. They lived in a little town about 2 miles from downtown Jerusalem. So it wouldn't take all that long to get there. So we'll pick up that, Jesus he delays after he heals. He hears that Lazarus is ill. Then he tells his disciples an interesting thing. Lazarus is sleeping. They said, oh, if he's asleep, then that means he's getting better. The fever's broken or whatever it is. And no, he says Lazarus is dead. Now, it's an interesting note that death for the Christian is called sleep. It's as the body has stopped and is then buried and decay sets in. But one of these days there will be resurrection, and we'll pick back up with a body being alive again. Now, in that interim of sleep, quote, sleep that's an apparent metaphor looking at the body has ceased moving. It does not mean that the soul has gone to sleep. That is what some of the religious cults have picked up on. They use that term. It's called soul sleep. And every time you pick up a commentary from a Christian commentator, a conservative Christian commentator, they will say, this is not soul sleep as some people think of it. In that, you die, you're unconscious, and then suddenly the next thing you know is resurrection. You're transported through time to judgment day or resurrection. That ain't necessarily so. And the points in contraindication to that are Jesus on the Mount of Transfiguration is talking to Moses and Elijah, who are aware of his coming decease and what he is about on the earth. And they have a conversational relationship. Another point in contraindication to soul sleep is the thief on the cross, where Jesus says, today you'll be with me in paradise. It's not, you're going to wake up some centuries from now, suddenly aware that you're in my presence in paradise. No, it's today you'll be with me in paradise. We have also the story of the rich man and a different Lazarus who was a beggar. That Lazarus who is in Abraham's bosom and awake and able to talk to the rich man who is tormented in these flames. So those three things are why we don't say soul sleep, because there is apparent torment for the wicked. There is apparent blessing and comfort for, and an interaction with Jesus for the saved. So that's where we leave it. Now, I'm going to pick up in verse 32 here. Martha and Mary both said, Lord, if you'd been here, he wouldn't have died. He looks like he delays in order to give Lazarus time to decline and die. And then he starts from where he is. And by the time he gets there, it has been days that Lazarus has been dead. So Jesus arrives. It says, verse 17, he'd already been in the tomb 4 days. Now, Jewish people bury the same day, if at all possible. They don't do any of the modern American notion of death where you embalm and the person is laid out and there's visitation and people come from miles away. Instead, it is the man dies, he's buried, he's going to go into a tomb. Now, the tomb is described as a cave. There were known caves, known tombs where it was a horizontal cave into a hillside. And there is a site that is revered as the location of Lazarus' burial. It goes back to ancient times, which has some steps down. So it's more of a vertical cave. And then there's a threshold or vestibule. But he's already been dead 4 days. Verse 19, it says, a considerable number of the Jews had gone out to see Martha and Mary to console them concerning their brother. That summary word Jews is John's word for Jewish religious people, not just merely ethnically Jewish, but it would be religious leaders, Pharisees, teachers, scholars of the law. Apparently the family was very well regarded. And so Mary is seen at Jesus' feet. Martha goes out and talks to him. They both say that, well, let's just read verse 21. Verse 20, Martha heard that Jesus was coming. She went to meet him while Mary remained sitting in the house. Martha then said to Jesus, Master, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. And even now, I know that whatever you ask from God, he will grant it to you. Now, that seems like it's going to be contraindicated by her surprise at the resurrection of Lazarus in just a few minutes. But Jesus says, your brother shall rise again. And Martha says, I know that he will rise again at the resurrection in the last day. There were a couple of schools of thought. The Pharisees did believe in a resurrection at the last day. And this is probably tied to the content of some verses and passages in the book of Daniel, which speaks most clearly to a resurrection. The Sadducees, as religious leaders, did not believe there was anything after this life. They rejected anything except the first 5 books of the Old Testament: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And so there is kind of a humorous pun that says they didn't believe in heaven or anything after this life. That's why they're so sad, you see. So you can remember what they did or didn't believe. That little detail, theological detail, Paul uses when he's on trial for bringing Timothy into the temple compound. He says, I'm here based on my belief in the resurrection from the dead. And immediately those judging him are divided into 2 camps. And the Pharisaical side would have said, oh, that's a possibility because we believe in resurrection from the dead. And the Sadducee side, which became more and more politically aligned because of their belief that only in this life is there any meaning, there's nothing afterwards. They say, oh, he's guilty then because he believes in a resurrection from the dead. So they're divided, there's uproar. Paul does that little trick, a rhetorical trick with them. But anyway, back to verse 24. Martha says, I know that he will arise again at the resurrection in the last day. So we would think that this family is associated with the Pharisees, their belief system, and the Jews that John is talking about here coming would have been Pharisee people. And so Jesus says to her, this is one of the I am statements. Oh, I forgot to say this in the introduction. In the first half of John chapter 1, Jesus has then in parallel throughout the book of John, he has I am the bread of life. I am the light of the world. I am the door of the sheep. And so I am the good shepherd. And so you can do kind of, if you wanted to, if you had a paper New Testament, like a spare one sitting around, you could do a color coding system and note all of the I am statements in one color, all of the signs that Jesus performed, those 7 signs, in another color. And then you can start to see the density of these significant events versus what Jesus says about himself. And then in proximity to the signs, and then go back and color code the same way the things he described Jesus, the titles he gives Jesus back in chapter 1. That's kind of a cool personal Bible study. But here he says, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, although he may die, yet he shall live. Now, that's a remarkable statement. This is not just merely, as C.S. Lewis has pointed out, a good teacher, a morally good teacher who makes a statement like that. He says he's either telling the truth or he's mentally ill to the point of saying the type of man who says that I'm a chicken or I'm a hard-boiled egg. It's just like, this does not make sense for a morally good teacher to make this kind of pronouncement about himself unless he is the living God incarnate. He says, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, although he may die, yet he shall live. And whoever continues to live and believes on me shall never actually die at all. Do you believe this? And Martha says, yes, Lord, I have believed. And I'm reading from the Amplified here. I have believed, I do believe that you are the Messiah, the anointed one, the Son of God, even he who was to come into the world. Now, that is an incredible statement of faith. This is moving from cognitive into the controlling factor for the whole life. That's what happens at Christian conversion. You can have, like the blind man. Remember the blind man? He knew a lot about Jesus. He could debate and defend Jesus with the people that put him on trial, the religious tribunal that put him on trial, but he still didn't know Jesus. This happens with all of us. We have fact. You may have been a tiny child in Sunday school and got all the facts about Jesus, or you may have been in your 20s in college when you started finding this factual information about Jesus, and you may have come to a place where you say, I conceptually believe that this is true, that these things happened in history, and then it has to move down somewhere into personal response. It's not sufficient just for it to be in the cognitive part of your brain, and you're going to be okie dokie because you could pass a multiple choice test when at the entrance to heaven, true or false. It's not going to be that way. Instead, there's this motion from cognitive into entire being, into the heart, that is mediated by the Holy Spirit. And so she says, I believe you are the Messiah, the Christ. You are the one who is to come into the world. Now, she's making a declaration of faith. I know you're the guy, but here's a problem. Her brother is still dead. She is not yet capable of understanding, who would be capable of understanding what's about to happen here. You're the Messiah, the anointed one. She's saying, you are the fulfillment of this Old Testament prophecy, series of prophecies. We had 450 years of silence when the Old Testament ended, and now things are in motion. It's you. You're the one who was to be sent. You're the one who was to come into the world. And then after she said this, she went back and called her sister Mary privately, who was whispering to her, the teacher is close at hand and is asking for you. When she heard this, she sprang up quickly and went to him. Now, Jesus had not yet entered the village, but was still at the same spot where Martha had met him. When the Jews who were sitting in her house, with her in the house, and consoling her, saw how hastily Mary had arisen and gone out, they followed her, supposing that she was going to the tomb to pour out her grief there. Because Martha comes in, whispers, Mary gets up and runs out. So they, she's torn up. Let's go with her. Let's go with her. So they're going to the tomb to pour out grief. And when Mary came to the place where Jesus was, she saw him. She dropped down at his feet, saying to him, Lord, if you'd been here, my brother would not have died. And that's true. When Jesus saw her sobbing, and the Jews who came with her also sobbing. Now the word there is wailing, like they did for funerals. If you didn't have enough within you to wail good enough, you could hire paid mourners to wail at a funeral of a loved one. It's kind of culturally a little bit different than the way we do it. But it says instead here, when Jesus saw her sobbing, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. Now, I've got a little commentary on that phrase. Let me see. I'm going to share that with you. Here it is, right here. The Greek word translated crying can also mean wailing or lamenting, and places an emphasis on the noise that was made as part of the grieving process. Jesus' response, on the other hand, was that he was deeply moved in his spirit and troubled. This term can also include anger and indignation, and it could be used figuratively to express inward turmoil or let's see. Yeah, I don't see that worked for you. But it has this mixture of inward turmoil. It's different from the emotion they had. Now we want to speculate, why is Jesus having this kind of emotion? What's he angry at, or what he is disturbed at, or is he troubled? And I think what we have here is that Jesus is just that empathetic. He sees they're terrified at the presence of death, wailing. We have lost this person. There is no way to get this person back. Maybe there's a resurrection from the dead. No, there's no resurrection from the dead. There's no hope. You've got all of these kinds of things going on in kind of in intellectual combat with each other. And then there's, frankly, death is loss and separation. And Jesus' response is that he is deeply troubled. And I think this shows us that Jesus is empathetic. Now, let's think about funerals. Can you think, what would be the most significant funeral you have attended? And I would let you open your mics here if you would like to answer that question. What was the most significant funeral you think you have ever attended? The most meaningful or whatever. Anybody got any? Let's go to gallery view to answer this so I can see if you unmute. Anybody want to talk about a significant funeral that you went to? Might have been a grandparent, might have been a parent, a very dear friend. I know some are more wrenching than others. Philip,
My mother's funeral to me was the most significant because I was with her through the last. My brothers weren't here. I had to deal with everything. And when I was sitting with her, I wrote up basically her I'm not sure what the term is, it zapped out of my brain. Basically, our preacher read it as opposed to even doing anything for his own because of all the things my mother had done. And I mean, it even moved my brother.
Yeah. Dennis, I've noticed you're unmuted. Did you have something?
I know that everybody has in mind an impressive type of funeral that they went to. I think what sticks out in my mind when you brought it up is just the opposite. I was at a funeral church full preachers preaching for the person he knew in a casket below him there. And he spent quite a while preaching hell pretty hot. And the funeral director come down and stopped him and put him out of the pulpit.
Well, goodness gracious. All right, we're gonna go on to our scripture passage. So they both sisters, now it's like there's no mention of husbands. So their financial well-being would have been predicated on the existence of their brother. Okay, that's the way that society was structured for them. And now they are more or less at a loss, but they are grieving the loss of their brother, apparently a longish decline, enough time to get word to Jesus that they knew he was dying. And now they both express this dismay. Now, Martha has had this declaration of faith that Jesus is the Messiah. Let's see what Mary says. Mary just falls at his feet and says, if you'd been here, my brother would not have died. And Jesus responds by being deeply moved and troubled in spirit. In my translation that I'm reading today, he chafed in spirit and sighed and was disturbed. And some people have even noticed that the word there is used also of horses that whinny in when they're threatened or dismayed or disturbed in some way. Kind of an interesting Greek word that we don't have direct access to, one-to-one word in English. And so verse 34, and he said, where have you laid him? They said to him, Lord, come and see. And now the shortest verse in the Bible, Jesus wept. And this is a different kind of crying. Now, why would Jesus cry? Now, again, I know that you have heard sermons on this, or you've encountered some explanation. What is Jesus crying about? He knows he's about to raise him from the dead. So anybody got what do you remember about why would Jesus cry here? Anybody?
I think it very well could be that he was sorry he had to let Lazarus die and put Mary and Martha through all of this. I mean, he knows he's going to come back, but the pain and anguish that they went through, he was sorry that he had to do that. I mean, it's like disciplining your child. You don't want to put them through that, but you have to sometimes. And this is for the glory of God. They have to. He can't raise him from the dead unless he's dead. And then all the ramifications that come with that.
Okay, Sally, I notice you have unmuted. What do you have for us?
Bart and I were talking about this, and Bart said that Lazarus was so close to this family, like just what Philip said. It hurt Jesus because they were good friends. You know, Mary, Martha, and Lazarus were good friends of his. So he was touched by all of the anguish around him.
And this gives us then the idea that Jesus is so totally identified with us in his humanity. He's so totally empathetic with us that he understands when we're torn up about something, when we have loss, when we have disappointment, or when we have the terrible grief like Martha and Mary were going through. Now, in verse 36, after it says Jesus wept, the response of the religious people who had come to comfort the Jews said, verse 36, see how tenderly he loved him. What a beautiful picture of our Savior that is. But some of them said, wait, could not he who opened a blind man's eyes have prevented this man from dying? Everybody's thinking he could have healed him so he wouldn't have died. Everybody's thinking is death is final because that's the way it is every other time that you have experienced, right? Every other time you've had experience of is that the dead person stays dead. Now they had, in the commentaries, you'll read the notion that they had an idea that the soul hung around the corpse for 3 days. And that, you know, it could have been because every once in a while somebody resuscitated that they thought had died. So that's that was how they were thinking, and so that comes into play here in the 4 days that Lazarus is dead. Now here they have said a true thing. The man who was born blind, nobody ever heard of a miracle like that. This guy, he did that. He could have kept Lazarus from dying. Verse 38. Now Jesus, again sighing repeatedly and deeply disquieted, approached the tomb. It was a cave, a hole in the rock, and a boulder lay against the entrance to close it. Again, I'm reading from the Amplified Version. You can think, you know, it could have been a round boulder, but more likely, if this was a prepared tomb, that this was a disc-shaped rock with a flat place on it. So it could be rolled so that the flat place would then keep it from rolling again. So to get it back open, you really had to have a couple guys with the right kind of levers to lift it up so then it could move out. And then, but when you put it back, ka-thunk, it would go right into place and be stable to protect the tomb from, say, wild animals or grave robbers or whatever might have been the problem. So it says a cave and a boulder lay against the entrance to close it. Verse 39, Jesus said, take away the stone. Martha, now the sister of the dead man, exclaimed, but Lord, by this time he throws off an offensive odor, for he has been dead for 4 days. Middle East, warm climate, corpse. He's dead. Deadity, dead. He is really dead. And it's going to be unpleasant when you open the door. Jesus said to her, did I not tell you and promise you that if you would believe and rely on me, you should see the glory of God? Now, that's an interesting question. She said, I know, back in verse 26, he said, whoever continues to live and believes in me shall never actually die at all. Do you believe this? She said, yes, Lord, I have believed. I do believe that you are the Messiah, the anointed one. And now he's saying, open the door. And she's saying, wait, are you sure you want to do that? Are you sure you want to do that? Because I love in the King James, it says he stinketh. I remember that from my childhood. But he says, did I not tell you, did I not promise you that if you would believe and rely on me, you should see the glory of God? So they took away the stone. And Jesus lifted up his eyes, and then he's going to pray. He says, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. You've heard me already. Yes, I know that you always hear and listen to me, but I've said this on account of and for the benefit of the people standing around, so that they may believe you did send me, that you've made me your messenger. So this as a sign, the raising of Lazarus has as its intended goal to raise belief in the onlookers, because they're going to see something nobody has ever seen before, right? They're going to see somebody raised from the dead. Now, the other place Jesus has, I said nobody, that was a poor way to say it. There are other gospel accounts, the widow's son and so forth, where they're raised from the dead. The little girl who Jesus says, little girl, I say to you, arise, and she is up. Also during the ministry of Elijah, which would have been centuries past, nobody was alive who had ever seen anything like that. So yes, they are going to experience something in the death of Lazarus where he's not just died that day, like the little girl and the widow's son, but he is really dead. He's decayed. Now you think about it. I'm a chemist for a living. Think about this on a biochemical level, all of that decay process, everything that's started to come apart chemically, the cells and everything else is going to be undone at a word from Jesus. And he's going to be back alive. And he's going to be, we would assume, robust for his age category when he is resurrected from the dead. So they took away the stone. He prays the prayer, and he says the intent is, I'm praying out loud so that you, Father, this communication, what's about to happen, will let them believe that you have sent me. They will know that the very God of heaven has sent me into the world to do things, and I am the Messiah, as Martha has said. So when he had said this, he shouted with a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. Augustine wrote, if he hadn't put Lazarus on there, every tomb in the world would have been open. That's a lovely thought, but that's an ancient Christian thought. That's an ancient quote, but he says, Lazarus, come out. And he says it in a loud voice. And out walked the man who had been dead, his hands and feet wrapped in burial cloth and with a burial napkin bound around his face. So when the body died, the relatives, when a person died, the relatives would, usually the women, would wash the body. And then they would wrap it in linen, kind of a linen sheet, leaving the face uncovered, and then they would do horizontally strips around to hold the linen in place, and then they would put a separate cloth over the face, so that at the very last moment before you close the tomb, you could see the face of your departed, one would suppose, and then they would wrap it up and close it. There's mention of spices being in there, so that for the burial, which would have kind of formed a glue, maybe to make the strips of cloth stick together, and the spices were to protect from an offensive odor, but only for a short period of time. So I see Lazarus as up and having to hop out because he's tied up in this bunch of linen cloth wrapped around the body, and then strips horizontally around to kind of tie it in place. And so here he comes hopping out of the tomb, and everybody's going to be blown back. And it doesn't say, everybody said, what was it like being dead, Lazarus? I always wanted to know. There was a play written where taking off on the story of Lazarus, and the way that they plot to kill him is they threaten to kill Lazarus, and he just laughs and laughs and laughs because he's already been there and seen what the other side looks like. And that's a happy thought to me. I like that. But that's an extrapolation from scriptures. It's not directly mentioned in scriptures. But anyway, so out walked the man who had been dead, his hands and feet wrapped in burial cloths. Now, verse 45. Upon seeing what Jesus had done, many of the Jews who had come with Mary believed on him. They are going to say, this is the Messiah, we are wholeheartedly casting our affairs. This is not just cognitive belief. They would have entertained cognitively the idea of he could heal a man born blind. They might have encountered Jesus as healer and say he's in a different category, some sort of prophet. But now they're going to cast their entire being, depending on what Jesus is up to be what God is doing in the world. And that's what they know at this point. They don't know everything. They don't have the writings of Paul yet to expand on the significance of the life of Jesus. They just have, this has beat anything I have ever seen in my life. And so it says that many believed on him, the ones who had come with Mary and adhered to him and relied on him, in the Amplified translation. But verse 46, an interesting thing, but some of them went back to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus had done. Now, in the verses that, we'll come back to that in just a minute, in the verses that follow, it says the Pharisees and chief priests, which would be, that's the Sanhedrin, maybe, called a meeting of the council. What are we going to do? This man performs miracles, and we know he can't be the Messiah. So what are we going to do? If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe on him, and the Romans will come and take our place away. And so they are more, they've already made up their minds, and that he can't be what other people are saying he is. And so we've got to do something about this, or we will lose our political power, and the Romans will come and take the temple away from us. And that actually was what happened in AD 70, some 30 few years later, when the Romans destroyed Jerusalem and the temple. But the chief priest Caiaphas says, you don't know anything, nor do you understand or reason out. It's expedient for your own welfare that one man should die on behalf of the people, then the whole nation should perish. And John points out he was speaking prophetically and didn't know it when we step back and see the entire life of Jesus. Well, let's go back to the last verse for today's lesson. Some of them went back to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus had done. What was their motivation? I don't know. What do you think? What was their motivation? Was it something like they were saying, nah, 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 nah. Were they saying, you guys have got it wrong. This guy raised Lazarus from the dead. We've seen a significant miracle. You know, was that what was happening? Was that the thing that was happening? Or was it, hey, you've got problems. This guy's done some significant miracle and you got to stop him, and they're spying on Jesus. I've never seen in a commentary the perspective that I had is like, you guys have been wrong. You need to pay attention. There's something significant going on here. This guy just raised a man from the dead that had been dead 4 days. And I think that may have been a warning from some Pharisees who were sympathetic to Jesus, and to the head guys, to try to get them to change their mind. And instead they go put this on trial, and they also start looking for a way to kill Lazarus too. Isn't that an ugly thought? Is that not ugly? Okay, now we're going to open for comments, observations, insights that you have. And I've got a couple of questions from the teacher's book I want to start with. How should we respond to people who are hurting? And I think that's very poorly phrased after that. How should you respond to people that are hurting in light of how Jesus responded? What do you think?
I think we need to show that we care, show some of God's love to them if we have it in us. You had asked about funerals and the Jewish motivation, and it reminded me that the Jewish mother of the gospel group, the Isaacs, came to know who Jesus really was at her husband's brother's funeral. The people there, she said, really believed that they would see him again. And this was because of Jesus. He really listened and became a Christian.
Okay. Okay, let me expand this question. In times of grief, what should you not say to people that are hurting?
I know how you feel.
I know how you feel, because you don't know, Al. You might know a little bit, but you don't know everything. Very good. Anything else you should not say?
I think there's a lot you should not say. I think your presence with them, holding their hand, showing them compassion is one of the biggest ways, because a lot of times, they don't want to be preached to during that particular time. I've seen instances where people, were just sort of turned off by it. And I just think that by them knowing that you love them, that you want to hold their hand through this situation, they're not alone. If you did that, you're successful.
Okay. I had some deacon training once where they said, do not ask yourself the question, what will I say when I get there? But instead ask yourself the question, how will I listen? Take some of the pressure off. Any other insights there?
I remember when Debbie Reynolds' brother died in the work accident.
Yeah, a TVA helicopter crash. Wow.
And we knew there would be just so very many people at the visitation. I told Debbie, we won't come. What can I do? And she let me do some laundry for her.
Yeah.
And later she said how much that helped. And there are many things that can be done. Of course, one of the most common is take some food, but even just everyday basic things. What day is your trash day? I'll take out your trash. Or someone mentioned to me once that a neighbor came and shined the kids' shoes and just made sure they were ready.
Ready to go to the funeral. Yeah. Okay, I've got another question here. Does Jesus' emotional response make him more approachable, or have you ever thought about it?
It's the human side of God.
Yeah. He condescended, is the word theologians use. And there he is at the tomb crying. Philip, I thought that was a beautiful insight you had about he was weeping because of what he had to put them through to get to the point where he was demonstrating in this terrific sign.
It shows that it's okay to do it. If Jesus has done it, then we can do that. It's okay. It's not I've got to be a big, stern, bold, whatever. We're allowed to be human. He's our example.
Okay.
Well,
look what he had to put Lazarus through. And what I'm trying to say is, look, we don't know how Lazarus could have suffered through that whole thing. And here it is, he's going to have to face death again, and he's going to face death as a wanted man. Because of the leaders has made him the enemy, and Lazarus, in a way, is a preacher at this particular time. He's one that's drawing people to Christ through his living testimony.
Man.
And some tradition says he could have died a horrible death under the umbrella of being tortured some particular way.
Huh. I had not seen
That's
that.
that's a traditional thing now. I mean, I read
Yeah.
it. You can read a lot of stuff that
Now
he did become some kind of a bishop.
But we do want to learn more, don't we?
Oh yeah, I want to
happened
learn more
next?
about what happened to him. And there was nothing in the Bible that he had ever said another word after that. And by the way, when they brought him out of the tomb, I don't think he stunk at all.
Right, right. It was all undone. All the chemistry worked backwards through a simple word from Jesus. That kind of creative act almost created anew.
Yeah, if he smelled it all, it's like a brand new baby, you know.
Yeah, brand new baby smell. Okay.
What I think is significant is Jesus never even laid hands or whatever. It's just come out. God has brought you back from death. Come out. There was no, oh, he just massaged his heart and it came back beating or any of that. It was literally proof through God.
Yeah. Wow.
Also, this is confirmation of the fact that Jesus was God, because he did just speak. Lazarus was brought back, but also that he, excuse me, that he was human. He was God and man, because of he did show those emotions
Mhm.
in one situation, the same situation.
I want to throw in there too, while I got the chance to, I got to say this and I got to go. Nancy, you too are that testimony today that God does heal.
Yes.
And thank God for that. I praise the Lord for that. And it's not a light thing that he has done for you. And it's especially the past few weeks. So thank you for being on there today.
Yes. We're very thankful that I have not been as sick as I was 4 years ago.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Well, thanks for your prayers on that. Remember to pray for each other. I'm going to leave you now with the question Jesus asked Martha. He says this: I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, although he or she may die, yet that person will live. And whoever continues to live and believes on me shall never actually die. Do you believe that? And that's the question Jesus asked Martha. And that's the question he's asking us. Do you really believe that? What kind of perspective does that put the, quote, important things of this life in, when we know that we're dealing with the eternal and the possibility of eternal significance in the lives of other people? So that's where
We
have
have already died through baptism.
Say that again, Philip.
We have
That's right.
already died through baptism.
Yeah,
That's
through
right.
baptism into death, as Paul states it. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. My goodness. My goodness. All right.